Hello everyone, this video is going to be part 2 of the Introduction to TextMesh Pro for Unity. Now in part 1 I focused on the advanced text rendering capabilities of TextMesh Pro, and I demonstrated how we can create some pretty sophisticated text objects like the ones we're seeing on screen, or we have a texture on the face of the text, an outline, beveling and glow and shadows, and so on and so forth. Now in this second video I'll be focusing on the improved text layout controls that TextMesh Pro brings to Unity, and for that I'll be using mostly plain text objects. So let's get going. We'll begin by creating a new scene and adding a new TextMesh Pro object by going to Create, UI, and then we'll choose the TextMesh Pro text. Let's expand the canvas to focus on our text object. We'll use the text input box to change the text. Now, if you've seen part 1 of the introduction to TextMesh Pro, you've seen that TextMesh Pro uses an advanced text rendering technique called sign distance field. This makes it so that I can zoom in to my text and it will always render super cleanly and super sharp at any point size or resolution. There's another benefit where it allows me to modify the look of my font by changing material properties. And although I said we were going to use plain font, we are going to be using mostly plain font for this demo, but plain doesn't have to be too plain either. So let's just tweak this a little bit so it's more visually pleasing. So we'll just dilate the text a little bit. So I'm going to go to about 0.15. Let's add an outline. Same thing again. I'll go back to 0.15. Let's add a nice little shadow. So we're going to enable underlay. We'll offset it a little bit. You can see here it's being offset, and we'll move it down a little bit and add some softness to it. There we go. Not as plain and as boring. Good enough for the demo. Okay, now let's take a look at our editor panel. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually change the size of the text container and enable word wrapping so that the text is easier to see, since now it's wrapping into a smaller container. And as you can see, as I change the size of the container, the word wrapping kicks in. Cool. Let's look at the panel. So first thing, we saw how to enter new text. Font asset is where you would select your font asset. These are basically the font types, right? So Arial, Impact. We can look at this one here, and we can see that they can all have different presets and different styles to begin with. Now these are created using the built-in font asset creator, which is accessed by going to Window, TextMesh Pro Font Asset Creator, and in here you can select a true type or open type font to generate these font assets, and I kind of covered that in the first video. So the next thing we're going to look at is font style here. This is like a quick way to make the entire text bold, for example, or italic, or underline, or convert everything to lowercase. In this case, it would only affect the capital E, or make everything uppercase. Or this S stands for small caps, so it will make everything small caps, except it preserves the capital letters and makes all the other ones small cap. Now, these are all accessible via the rich text tag. So for example, if we want to make the word some italic, and we'll close out the italic here, and let's make it underline as well. And we'll close out the underline, and let's actually make it small caps. And we'll tell it where small cap ends. So now, as you saw, we actually, the same things here, we use the rich text tag to actually control it per word or per character, as you saw. So let's get rid of all these so we can be working with just like mostly plain text. Moving on, vertex color allows you to control the color of your text, and this affects the vertex colors themselves. There are different color tags in TextMesh Pro, so let's make use of that. Color tag can be entered by going with the number sign with 3 hexadecimal pairs, or actually 4. So let's go make some orange. FF8000 would be orange. and let's say slash color to say where it ends. The fourth pair would control alpha, so let's go 80, so now this is semi-transparent. The color tag can also be defined as color equal, which keeps it compatible with how Unity does the color tag in UI text or text mesh. So that way, if you already have some text that you're using in your title, you can just keep on using the same text with the same tags. So why is there two color tags? Well, it's kind of simple. I'm kind of lazy and I don't enjoy having to type the word color equal all the time. So now the version of TextMesh Pro that I'm using right now is a beta release. This is available to all registered users of TextMesh Pro via the TextMesh Pro user forum. Now this is not the same version that's on the Asset Store. I haven't updated the version of the Asset Store yet, as I'm still adding features in 4.6 and waiting on some fixes from Unity, and it doesn't make sense to keep updating the Asset Store package until all these things are done. So I think it's more convenient for users to just come to the TextMesh Pro user forum and just pick up the latest beta release there. So let's move on with the other features. So we saw the color vertex and the color tags. We can also define a color gradient. So right now, let's just set up a gradient. We'll go, I guess, yellow or greenish at the bottom. I was aiming for yellow, but I kind of failed there. So now we can see, I won't define all four, you get the idea. So you can define a color gradient, but as you notice, this text, which has the tag, didn't change. My assumption was pretty simple. If as a user you bothered typing a color tag for the word sum, my assumption is, well, you want it to have that color. Now, just in case you don't want it to have that color, you can simply click override tag, and this does what it says. It overrides the tags that are there in terms of color. So that's what that feature is. So let's disable that and let's keep moving. So part of the advantage of using TextMesh Pro is again the fact that we're using this advanced text rendering technique. So if I change the point size, you can see that the text scales linearly and it looks great at any point size or resolution. You'll also notice that it changes in 0.01 point increment, which is different from UI text, which changes in 1 point increment. Let's go undo here, back to 36. Let's enable auto size. So when we choose auto size, there's a minimum and a maximum. Let's actually expand it so that the text we can see, actually I have to go bigger. This is what the text looks like at 72 points, and then we can shrink it to 18, works with word wrapping and all that stuff. Let's go back to 72. Let me zoom out a little bit so I have more room and show another feature. So there's this minimum, maximum, and then there's line. Let me enter -10 here. So sometimes you may be trying to fit a text object into a certain container and it almost fits but doesn't fit, and you would prefer to not change the point size to make it fit. Well, this line feature basically tells TextMesh Pro that before you begin shrinking the text or changing the point size, change the line spacing first, and once we're at -10, then begin to reduce the point size. And this is a feature that was requested by one of TextMesh Pro's users, and it's actually pretty cool. Not sure I'd use it all the time, but hey, if you need it, it's there. So let's disable auto size and let's move on. Now our text container is huge. We'll shrink it again so we can look at the text. Spacing, you can adjust character spacing. There's actually a tag for that, which I'll show later on. You can adjust line spacing, and you can also adjust paragraph spacing. And to show the paragraph spacing, let me load a new scene. We now have a large block of text that contains 2 paragraphs. Let's adjust the paragraph spacing as I described before. Before taking a look at the alignment features in TextMesh Pro, let's take a quick look at this overflow panel here. So in overflow mode, as we change the size of our text container, we'll see that nothing happens to the text, meaning in terms of vertically. If I was to change it this way, obviously the word wrapping occurs. But if I was to choose the truncate mode, well, then whatever line doesn't fit, it would get truncated. Now if we choose this other mode called ellipsis, instead of truncating, it will insert basically the three dots here as a visual reminder that not all the text is actually being visible. Now let's take a look at alignment. We'll go back to normal overflow mode. So the text right now is all left aligned. We could have it center aligned, right aligned, or even in TextMesh Pro justified, which means the text is now flush with both the left and the right margin. And you can even control the blend between using word spacing and character spacing to justify the text. Now, up until now, text alignment has always been a global thing per text object, meaning the entire block of text is left aligned or center or right. But what if you wanted to control that per paragraph or per line or for a title? Here we have a large block of text that contains multiple paragraphs that are all aligned differently. This is made possible by using the alignment tag in TextMesh Pro, which takes the form of align equal left, center, right, or justified. So if we look at this example, we're seeing that the title is center aligned, whereas, for example, this paragraph here is right aligned, or the quote, again, back to center alignment. This is actually a nice example also of how we can combine different rich text tag to achieve, the different colors, using italic, and again, all the alignment functions. Now, we can also see here that we're using the size tag for the title or even for the quote, and the size tag takes different forms. One of the form is size equal a point size, which would be an absolute value. Another form is size equal plus or minus a modifier over the base tag. So for example, size equal plus 14 would result in something that would be 36 plus 14 or 50 point size. The last variation is size equal percentage something, which would then keep the text proportional to whatever point size we're using. So here, if I change the 36 to something else, we can see that the title at the top is always 130% of whatever value I'm using. Whereas, for example, this quote here is always going to be 75% of whatever I'm using here. Let's take a look at some additional rich text tags in TextMesh Pro. Here we see an example of several tags from bold, italic, underline, superscript, subscript, as well as the size tag that we've already seen. We can see here all of them being used kind of together, where we have our superscript, subscript, bold, italic, underline. Now in TextMesh Pro, if I select the object here, select the font asset, and navigate to this font asset, you can see this custom editor panel where we have first information about the font asset, which is what TTF file was used, what is the sampling size that was used to generate it, then a bunch of values that are defined in the TTF by the font designer, including what the line height is, where the ascender is located, the sender, what the position of the underline is, for example, and you can modify these, including the offset for the superscript or subscript, as well as the size of the superscript or subscript. Now let me move it back up because it looks kind of, whoops, wrong one. This looks better. Now next we can see that the font asset has additional assets or sub-assets attached to it, which is the atlas that contains the characters part of the font. We have a default material. In TextMesh Pro, you can also control the weight of normal text as well as bold, meaning how bold is bold or how skinny is bold. It's kind of hard to control with my mouse, but you can see I can control the weight of bold. Let me make it a little bit thicker though. I can also control the slant of the italic. Now next we have our glyph info. These are all the characters that are in the font asset and where their coordinates are. And last, we have our kerning table. So for example, if I select the object, enable kerning, navigate back to our font asset, here I've already added a kerning pair that has between 2 and X. Doesn't make too much sense, but you can see how I can control the kerning between two characters. So you can add your own kerning pairs and manage those manually. Now let's take another look at some additional rich text tags in TextMesh Pro. Let me zoom into these. Here we can see we're using the size tag for the top line along with superscript and a color, the all caps tag, an example of the small caps. We have a tag called C-space, which allows you to control character spacing between words or characters. And then we have another one called monospace, which instead of using proportional spacing as defined by the font designer, you can force monospacing and control the spacing between the characters. There's another tag called line spacing, line height. Let me locate this real quick. So here we can see a text object that is using different size tags. So as I change the word wrap, actually we can see it nicely here. You can see that the spacing between lines here is much narrower than what it is up there. So in some cases, by default, this is the proportional line spacing, which is the way it should be done, in word processors and whatever. But some users wanted the ability to also control line height. So let's say you're trying to align the text with lines on a piece of paper, for example, as a background image. Well, this is where you would use the line H, which allows you to control and have the line height be a fixed value regardless of the font size itself. Here we have another example of a large block of text that is too big to fit within a certain region on screen. So one of the ways we could handle this is we could use in Unity 4.6 the scroll rect along with TextMesh Pro and masking. And if we basically go to the game view and enter play mode, we could have a user, scroll through the content in order to reveal this large block of text, right? That's certainly one valid option. Now another option and new feature in TextMesh Pro, let's disable this thing here and enable this one. Another feature in TextMesh Pro is this new page mode. Now what does that do? Well, let's go to the overflow mode and take a look at our text. So again, we have a large block of text. And typically, when the text exceeds the size of the container, one of the overflow mode could be ellipses or truncate or whatever. And if we were to choose truncate, obviously the whatever doesn't fit would get cut off, which is absolutely not what we want. So when we take a look at the page mode, what does it do? Well, the page mode takes whatever extra content doesn't fit and it forces it onto a separate page. So right now we're looking at page 0. Now we're looking at page 1, and now we're looking at page 2. Now, notice how the text here remains static. There's no string operation. Through TextMesh Pro, we're simply choosing which part of the text is being revealed at any given time. Now, you may have also noticed that, hey, wait a minute. If I go back to overflow, you've got this title here and this amount of content, and yet it's getting cut off. Why is that? Well, that's because there's a new tag called page, which allows you to force content to be put on its own page. So in this case, I wanted to actually have a page break right here. So if I switch to page mode, you'll see that it's forcing the content that follows the page tag to be on its own page. And that's what I did. So now let's take a look at this in action. Let's switch to game view, enter play mode. Here, this could be a dialog box in your game. Obviously, you'd style it and add a nice background. But this is an example of how a user could interact with the content to control the flow of the dialogue, for example. Or basically, every part of TextMesh Pro, there's a scripting API, so you can pretty much control everything I've been showing through scripts. So here's an example where I have a simple script that will basically control this pagination mode and reveal one character at a time, and as it gets to the end of a page it will switch to the next page. Notice again how the content remains totally static. We're just choosing which portion of the text we're showing at any given time. Another huge advantage of this static mode is I can change text alignment or any parameter because the text is all being wrapped and laid out as a block. So all these features, the bold, all the styling you're using and alignment is all respected in these modes. So let me put this back on pause right here and stop this thing and switch back to scene view. So basically, this video, I'm approaching 20 minutes now. Let me load the original scene that I was using with TextMesh Pro. Let's go right here. So my goal here in creating this two-part video or introduction to TextMesh Pro video was not to show you all the features, but it was to give you a good understanding of the basic functionality and features found in TextMesh Pro. Meaning in the first video I covered the advanced text rendering capabilities of TextMesh Pro, which allows you to create, amazing looking text like what you're seeing on screen with textures and outlines and bevels and glow and all that stuff. And the second video was to really show you the improved text layout controls that TextMesh Pro brings to Unity. Hopefully you enjoyed these two videos and you found them informative. Should you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post. And thank you for watching.